Okay, so I mean, this is something. Maybe this is what we'll do if the clock app goes belly up. You know what I mean? Maybe this is where we'll live. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I've never been live on here before. You can hear the rain. Yeah, it's really intense. It's like it is coming down. It's coming down out there. You made it. Yay. Less steps for posting. That's true. That's true. I mean, I prefer the clock app personally, but if it gets BANNED, um, then, you know, I'm going to give it another minute for people to get on. You know, to see if anyone comes over. Actually, I don't even need to, right? Because it's going to record right to here. This is day 11. I still need to upload day 10. But let's get started, because why not, right? It'll record right to here. Oh, wait, you know what? Yeah, whatever. Hold on. This is going to pause for 2 seconds, but I'm not, can you all hear? Okay. Is this going to go? I need to tell someone who doesn't know that we moved over to the other platform. Can you all hear this? Are we all okay? Are you alive? Are we alive? Am I alive? Is my face backwards to you? Hi. Hello. Yep. Okay. It's going to pause for a second, but don't stress. It's going to pause for a second, but don't stress. Okay. You think this is day 12? I think we already uploaded Sunday. I think Sunday was day 9 because I remember based on the clothes I was wearing. And I think yesterday was day 10 and today is day 11. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. Hey, Addie. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. I don't know. Anyway, we're going to read the next chapters of the Circus Train. Okay, we are on chapter 35. After a restless sleep, Alexander climbed out of bed. He tiptoed down the staircase, shivering as the early dawn chill curled its icy fingers around him. He watched the sun slowly illuminate the courtyard. What Theo had told him last night didn't change anything. As he knew all too well himself, everyone makes mistakes, and everyone deserved a second chance. At breakfast, Like confronted him, her face ashen. "It's gone," she said, anguish in her voice. "What's gone?" "The schedule I'd written out. It's gone." "Where did you last see it?" "At rehearsal yesterday. I'd put it down in the pile of costumes, and I thought that it was in the stack of fabrics I was carrying back to my room, but when I checked, it was gone. I looked everywhere, I promise." She looked like she was going to start to cry. Oh, thanks for the notification of the live now. It's a learning curve, Becca. We're all learning. Alexander glanced around the canteen, but no one was looking at them suspiciously. "Was anything else written on it?" Like wrung her hands. "Only the measurements for your costumes." "Okay," Alexander said, scanning the room again. "I'm sure people will just think it's something from the administrative office. There's nothing we can do now. Let's just hope that no one suspects anything." Back at the barracks, Theo and Alexander nodded at each other, silently acknowledging that the events that transpired the previous evening. After Attila and Vasily left, they ran through the plan for the day. Satisfied that they'd plotted out things as best as they could, Theo headed off to work, leaving Alexander to complete his final task. Double-checking that no one was around, he uncorked the bottle of brandy. With a stone, he ground up the barbiturate to a powder and then tipped it into the 2 bottles. Then he resealed the bottles carefully and headed to the carpentry shop. Alexander couldn't concentrate all day. His hands fiddled with the table leg as he was sanding. He was so nervous that he couldn't look at anyone else in the shop. When 5 o'clock arrived, he hurried out, unable to cast a backwards glance to the friends he was leaving. With the sun behind the clouds and the residents filling the seats for the big dress rehearsal, he slipped quietly away to hide near Eric and Frederick. As the faint strains of the children's choir warming up filled the air, Alexander heard Frederick and Eric joking with each other. He peered around the corner, took a deep breath, and strode straight towards them. They noticed him instantly, drawing themselves up. Firmly grasping the handle of his bag containing the brandy, Alexander flashed a big smile. Gentlemen, what are you still doing here? Alexander gestured to the stage area. Seats are filling up. Who gave you permission to address us? Frederick sneered. Alexander dropped his bag, making sure it was lying wide open, full view on the ground. He held up his hands as if in surrender. Forgive me. I simply wanted you to have a chance to experience the wonder of our magic. He had to stop himself from smiling as Eric's greedy eyes immediately registered upon the contents in the bag. What are you doing with this? He barked, yanking out one of the bottles. He shoved the bag towards Frederick, who took the other bottle. The commander's orders, sir. Theo required alcohol for his arthritis. He reached for the bottles, but they both pulled away. Why don't you run along to your little practice play? Frederick said, clutching the bag. We'll keep this safe. Alexander bit his lip to keep from laughing. It was almost too easy, he thought, as he watched Eric stroking the bottle. You're not going to watch us? A cold smile appeared on Frederick's face, and he gripped Alexander's shoulder with a large hand. Some of us have work to do. Frederick pushed Alexander with such force that he fell, sliding backwards onto the gravel. Dazed, Alexander shook his head. It took him a moment to recover, but when he did, he couldn't help but let out a tiny smile. The scene of Eric and Frederick leering at him as they sipped the stolen brandy was just too perfect. Finished with the guards, Alexander joined Theo backstage. The performances were set to begin at 6 and last about 2 hours. Is it done? Theo asked anxiously. Alexander nodded as he peeked from behind the curtain. It was a packed house. All of the residents and the administration were crammed into the courtyard. Despite it being a run-through, no one wanted to miss it. He waited backstage with Theo, watching performers warm up and don their costumes. Where's Attila? A resident in charge of the stage production rushed up to them. I need him in makeup now. Alexander scowled. He knew they needed to get back to Eric and Frederick. Well, we haven't seen him. Try Vasily, he shouted over his shoulder, and Theo raced to where Alexander had left the 2 guards, finding them motionless on the ground. Alexander knelt to check their pulses. Well? Theo asked. It's snowing again? Man, oh man, this is not good. This weather is just a mess. Theo asked, his breath making misty clouds in the chilly night air. Alexander jumped up. Let's move. Hauling the sleeping guards to the wheelbarrows they'd been using to cart show props all over the town, they covered them with tarps and then took a circuitous route back to the stage area, stopping in a darkened alcove nearby where Like had left the duplicate costumes. As people clapped and whistled, the two illusionists changed the guards out of their uniforms and into their show clothing. They grabbed the guards' guns and hid them under the uniforms, tucked everything into one of the wheelbarrows under the tarp. When they were finally done, they took a moment to catch their breath. Ready? Theo asked, panting. Alexander nodded and they took off again, steering the guards backstage, parking the tarp-covered wheelbarrows in the corner. No one would suspect that they were full of anything but supplies for the show. Nervous with anticipation, they waited anxiously as the performances went on, the vibrant costumes and live orchestra transporting the audience to the Boulevard des Clichés. When you're quite finished, move along. By 8 o'clock, only Alexander and Theo were left to perform. The backstage area was empty, save for the guards waiting to raise the illusionists above the tank. Give me a minute, Theo whispered to Alexander before slipping out into the audience. A second later, he was back, smiling. I told Berger to stay out there, that we needed to create a spectacle and get people cheering first. The curtains will open and reveal us suspended, ready to fall into the tank, he said. Alexander nodded, casting a sideways glance at the guard. He turned to Theo, giving him a wry look. Theo grinned. Would you do the honors? Gladly, Alexander said. He approached the guard, holding out the handcuffs. We're ready, he said. And as soon as the guard reached out, Alexander ducked, grabbing his legs. Caught off balance, the guard fell backwards, smacking his head on the ground. Theo crouched beside him, checking to make sure he was out cold. In the front of the curtain, Berger's commanding voice was booming out across the audience, who couldn't keep quiet. This next act is a masterful display of illusion by Theo the Magnificent and Alexander, his apprentice. A surge of applause filled the air. They will attempt to escape from a locked water tank while handcuffed and blindfolded. Hurry, Alexander yelled. He handcuffed Frederick to Eric, and Theo was pulling the potato sacks over their heads. He fastened the harness around them and looped the hook through it. And then the two illusionists moved out of view and began pulling the rope, hauling Eric and Frederick above the tank. In front of the audience, Berger droned on, "Behold, the greatest trick you will see tonight." Alexander imagined him waving his arms through the air, loving the attention. The curtain began to move, and they heard the audience gasp. They stayed out of sight, keeping the rope taut, waiting to release it. "On my count," Theo whispered. 3, 2, splash. The guards sank into the tank, and Alexander could tell from the way they moved that the chill of the water had woken them up. They watched as Berger pushed the cover on top of the tank and secured it. "Come," Theo whispered loudly, clambering away from the stage area. Alexander wanted to wait. He wanted to see Eric and Frederick squirm, to witness them experience just an ounce of the pain that they'd inflicted on everyone else. "Alexander, now!" Alexander said a silent prayer for everyone they were about to leave and ran. Lieke was waiting in the nearby alcove. Alexander pulled her into a hug. Their biggest hurdle was clear. The two men quickly changed and pocketed the guns. Now they looked like they were part of the staff, accompanying a nurse out of town. Then they rushed to the post where they picked up the guards earlier and grabbed the bikes laying on the ground. "Remember to walk slowly, like we have nowhere to be," Theo muttered. They strode confidently across the courtyard, tossing out snatches of German here and there, saluting the guards at the inner gate. "Where are you headed at this hour?" he asked, coming from his booth. "The lady wants a drink," Theo said, gesturing to Lieke. "Haven't seen you here before. I take pride in knowing all the nurses." The guard smiled seedily at Lieke, revealing a set of tobacco-stained teeth. He leaned towards her, running a finger down her cheek. "Ah, to be so young again." Alexander curled his hands into fists, readying himself to strike when Lieke raised her arm in salute. "Ooh. This is going to be hard for me to even say out loud. Ugh, I want to throw up even thinking of it. Heil Hitler!" Her face was stony, her once scared eyes now blazing with anger. Caught unawares, the guard stumbled back. "Heil Hitler!" the guard said, saluting her. "Please, enjoy your evening." It took everything in Alexander's power not to break into a run, but he knew he had to keep up the charade. They walked out of the unmanned gates, past the ominous arch that had welcomed them a little over a year ago, and jumped on the bikes. "That was too close," Alexander said, giving Lieke, who was perched on the handles of his bike, a quick peck on her cheek, but there was no time for discussion. "Go!" Theo yelled. Alexander pedaled as fast as he could down the road that led to the train station. As they rode away from Theresienstadt, he didn't look back, and there was nothing about that place that he wanted to remember. The station was 2 kilometers away, but they had to cut through a wooded area to reach it. Staying on the open path where the SS officers and the Czech Germandre regularly patrolled wasn't safe. Leaving the bikes on the ground, they walked briskly through the woods, not daring to look over their shoulders. So far, it didn't seem like anyone had tried to follow them, and even if they did, it didn't matter. They looked like staff members now. The forest was dark, but the fragments of light from the moon shone through, illuminating the station ahead. They stomped through the uncut brush, dark green fir trees and snow-covered roots, their breath forming pale white clouds in the air. As they approached the clearing, Alexander felt something stir inside him. When the train came into view, he clutched Liike's hand tightly. It was waiting silently, curls of wispy smoke rising from underneath it. Alexander didn't think he'd seen anything more beautiful. For a brief second, they halted at the edge of the wood. Theo and Alexander exchanged a tentative glance, but soon they broke into nervous laughter. Big grins plastered on their face. They hugged and punched the air as they started across the clearing. Their weeks of planning had paid off, and they'd done it. Theo walked on ahead. The train would depart soon, and they were planning to jump on one of the last cars. The platform felt like a ghost town, not a single person in sight. Still, it wasn't like they needed tickets. Given their uniforms, if anyone asked, they'd say that they had orders from Berger to travel to Prague. Alexander squeezed Liike's hand and smiled, watching her cheeks turn a rosy pink. He was almost at the tracks when the first gunshot sliced through the air, disrupting the eerie calm that hung around them. And then everything happened in slow motion. Alexander saw Theo's face tight with fear as he lunged toward him, and Lieke pushing them out of the way. As his body made contact with the hard ground, he saw Leo pull Frederick's gun and aim. But before he could pull the trigger, there was another gunshot, followed by a shrill scream. Lieke flopped onto the snow a few feet away. Dropping to his knees, Alexander scrambled to reach her. She lay on the ground, breathing heavily, her face frozen in shock as she tried to orient herself. Blood seeped slowly from her shoulders to the white snow, turning bright red. Without thinking, he heaved her up onto the back of the freight car in front of him. Theo. There were too many things happening at once. It was hard to keep track. Alexander spun around just in time to see Theo hurl himself at a Czech guard a few feet away as Frederick's gun slid out of his hand. From the train car, Like groaned, and Alexander turned back, holding his breath as he hastily tried to check on her wound. Unsure of what to do, he tore off his jacket and threw it over to her. I cannot leave Theo. Alexander realized that the only way out was to try to shoot the guard. His hands closed around the cold barrel of Eric's gun, and he drew it out of his pocket. Trying to figure out where to position himself, his eyes darted around and fell on a nearby lamppost, just a few feet away, which cast a hazy glow on a body. He ran over to it. It was Attila. His eyes stared up at Alexander, glassy and vacant. A chunk of his ear had been blown off, a bullet wound puncturing his chest. Blood formed a dark halo around his head. Next to him was the piece of paper that Like had lost. Attila, who couldn't let his suspicion go. Attila, who so badly wanted to be free and get rid of the Germans, and he thought he could trust the Jarmandri, revealing the plan that Alexander and Theo had made in exchange for his own freedom. Looking back to Theo, Alexander focused on where to aim his gun, but it was proving to be an impossible task. The two men moving so rapidly back and forth, he could hit Theo by mistake. Still, what choice did he have? Alexander moved his finger over the trigger, his hands shaking. Just then the loud whistle of the train assaulted his ears. His shot went wide, and he watched his heart plummeting as the bullet hit the snow a few feet away from his target. Go! Theo yelled, not taking his eye off the guard. Alexander looked back to where Like lay, her head raised slightly. He could tell she was searching for him, but the effort proved to be too much, and she lowered her head back down to the floor of the train car. Alexander hesitated, and then he made his decision. No! He yelled at Theo, rushing toward him. He raised his gun, aimed it squarely at the guard, and shot. Bang! The officer keeled over, grasping his right foot, yelping as his pistol fell to the ground. Alexander pushed Theo toward the train, keeping one eye on the injured man. You have to go now, he yelled, his voice raw. Theo opened his mouth to protest, but Alexander shook his head. If only one of them could survive, it was not going to be him. He would not let Theo, who had sacrificed so much for him, die on his watch. The train let out another loud whistle and then started to come to life, moving like a giant carnivorous animal, stretching its limbs, readying itself for a sprint. Theo, go! Alexander yelled more urgently as the train lurched forward. Theo turned to race back to the car, hoisting himself up next to Like. Alexander swiveled to face the guard, who was waving his arms to drag himself closer to his gun. He snarled at Alexander, who raised his own gun and aimed at him. He could hear Theo yelling at him to shoot. Holding his breath, he pulled the trigger. Nothing. The gun was jammed. Damn it! He swore, tossing the gun away. The guard, though not dead, couldn't get up and run. Behind him, Alexander heard the steady motion of the wheels turning. Alexander, run! Theo screeched, the desperation in his voice cutting to Alexander's thoughts. Alexander turned and sprinted towards the back of the train as it picked up speed. Come on! Theo yelled. He was lying on his stomach, his hand outstretched. Hurry! Alexander dug his feet into the snow, pumping his arms as fast as he could. The cold air made it feel like his lungs were on fire, but he didn't stop. He didn't know when he had started to cry, but the tears had wrestled their way into his eyes, and they were now streaming down his face. He realized now all he wanted was to live. You're almost there, Theo shouted. Alexander strained his arms forward, his fingertips grazing Theo's touch. No, Theo grasped. Alexander turned his head instinctively, and the injured guard had retrieved his gun and was aiming it squarely at them. Jump! Theo screamed. Alexander took a deep breath and leapt just as a gunshot shattered the air. Whoa, that's certainly something. Holy moly. I mean, holy freaking moly. Wow. Wow. I'm going to get a sip of water before we continue. But the main thing that I want to point out that's annoying is the next chapter goes back to, I'm walking through the zoo with my kids all stressed out by this. Oh my gosh, don't be stressed out. It's super intense. It's super intense. And the next chapter is Lena, so we don't even know what happened, which I find to be the height of rudeness. Chapter 36, December 1943, London, England. Lena, Clara called. In a minute, Lena called back. She twisted. This is emotional abuse, because I was just trying to read that and now they're going to send me back to England where Lena's living happily with her governess who's adopting her. Like, what? How am I supposed to do that? This is, we're going to do it, but like, this is rude. In a minute, Lena called back. She twisted to face the mirror and inspect her outfit one more time. Clara had braided her hair and looped it over her head, securing it with barrettes studded with pearls so it looked like she was wearing a crown. Lena had worn her smartest red dress for the occasion, and she tucked it at the waistband of her woolly tights, smoothing the skirt down again. Slicking on a bit of pink lipstick, she thought about the day ahead. After their appointment was over, Clara and Fitz were taking her out for lunch at the public house on Fulham Broadway to celebrate welcoming her to their family. Officially, as Clara had put it the night before, you were always part of the family, but after tomorrow we'll have the papers to prove it. Satisfied with her appearance, Lena glanced at the 2 necklaces lying on her dresser. She'd thought about wearing them many times, but today seemed even more appropriate. She took turns fastening each one around her neck, and then adjusted the strand of pearls and the star pendant so that they were just above her collarbone. Lena! I'm coming! Lena grabbed her purse and walked out into the hallway. You look lovely, Fitz said admiringly, handing Lena her coat as Clara draped a scarf around her neck. The trio walked out into the damp December air and climbed into Clara's father's bright orange Peugeot? I don't know what that means. I assume it's a car. They were staying with Clara's family over the holiday break. Fitz was due up north in 10 days' time. Clara had apologized for the transitory nature of the living arrangements, but Lena didn't mind. After so long without a family, it felt nice to have one to come home to, wherever they were living. As they sped towards the hall, Lena leaned her head against the back seat window. As terrifying as it was for her to admit, she was looking forward to making things official. She liked having tea and toast with Olivia every Sunday morning in the mess hall. She liked sitting in the warmth of Clara's tiny cottage, exchanging stories about daily activities of the school, while the wind howled outside. Clara was a less stern parent and more of a big sister, and though she didn't know Fitz nearly as well, anyone who could see the value in Clara was all right in Lena's eyes. Plus, she didn't think too many men would be so willing to welcome a teenage orphan into their home. The fact that Fitz did so without hesitation said a lot about his character. Lena sometimes lay awake at night, feeling guilty about how quickly she was settling into her new life. It seemed too soon for her to be moving on. She wasn't sure if she should even be allowed to feel happy, thinking about the lives that her father and Alexander would never get to complete. But then she remembered her father's words about her mother. She would have wanted us to move on and be happy, Lena. In one of their biology units that term, they'd learned about adaptation. Lena liked the analogy of comparing her own life to that of plants and animals that they studied, which changed in response to their environmental conditions. In this way, this adoption was the same thing. She was simply shifting herself in order to fit in and survive. Fitz pulled up outside in a nondescript government building and then turned off the car. The trio walked down the halls until they found the office that they were looking for. Once inside, the adults busied themselves with paperwork while Lena waited patiently. At length, the lawyer helping them through the process turned to her. Would you like to change your name? He held out a form, pointing to the top section. On the first line, Helena was typed out in block capitals. Next to it was the name Callista, and next to that was a blank space. She realized what the official was asking her. Her last name was the last thing linking Lena to her father and Beddington and Stirling World of Wonders, to Alexander, to the sunset-filled nights of Thessaloniki. Did she really want to lose the name she'd been given, the name that tied her to her old life and her parents simply because they were gone? Then she thought about how it had all ended, how she would carry the guilt of the way that she'd treated her father in those final moments as long as she lived. The past year had taught her that true grief and heartache would never permanently disappear. She knew deep down that she would continue to feel the loss of Theo and Alexander forever. But time waited for no one. She had the chance now to step into a new life. She made a silent promise never to forget where she'd come from and to honor her father and Alexander always, something she liked to think she was doing already by excelling in school. As she fingered the star of the necklace she was wearing, she hoped that in time the good memories of her childhood would overshadow the bad. But for now, she thought the best thing to do was to start fresh. If you like, it could be one of your middle names, the official continued, writing it out for her. He turned it around. Helena Callista Papadopoulos Thompson, it read. Perhaps it's a good compromise. Lena looked first at Fitz and then Clara, then at the lawyer and nodded. Welcome to the family, Clara said, wrapping her arms around Lena. The official smiled and began clacking away at his typewriter. Lena sat clutching Clara's hands as the steady sound of the keys erased her former identity. I mean, I get it, but like, harsh, bro. I get it, but it's just like, it's harsh. It's harsh, you know? Chapter 37, April 1944, London, England. The journey to London had been a long one, spanning 4 months, multiple cities, and countless dead ends. And still, the man soldiered on. He'd lost too many people at this point to give up on finding her. As he walked south from Fulham Broadway tube station, he consulted his map, pointing at the Parsons Green. Would have been a better choice, but no matter, he told himself as he trudged past the pedestrians. Doing his best to blend in. Even now, months removed from Theresienstadt, it felt odd to be able to walk freely. He looked around, taking in the crumbling buildings, rubble, and the film of dust that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in the air. With each passing step that brought him closer to the Smith family home on Chiddingstone Street, he felt his hopes falling. Judging by the scene unfolding around him, he would be smart to temper his expectations. When he finally found the number he was looking for, he was relieved to see that it was standing. Taking a deep breath, he walked up to the door, knocking firmly. There's no point in knocking. The man turned around to see a young boy standing on the pavement, a football tucked under his arms, eyeing him curiously. Oh, hello, the man said. He gestured to the house. By any chance, do you know if this is the Smith residence? The boy shrugged and began passing the ball back and forth between his hands. Might have been. He jerked his head to the right. We used to live 3 streets over, but left on account of the raid. Who's not feeling good? There was a raid? The boy nodded. The Luftwaffe attacked a few months back. Operation Steinbach, I think it was called. We moved to Brighton, where Mum's family is. He frowned. Only back for a day because Gran's at the hospital here. I'm sorry, the man said. The boy steeled himself. Don't like hospitals. They smell funny. Dad said I could go for a walk and that I had to be careful. He continued, dropping the ball to the pavement and dribbling it with his feet. So, this attack. They hit the street? The boy was concentrating on weaving the ball between his feet, but nodded. Loads of people died. The man shook his head, trying to collect his thoughts. He looked at the house again. Though it showed signs of surface wear and tear, it was still intact. Who's not feeling good? The comments go away really fast and I can't see them. Is everybody okay? You said you live nearby. Do you know who lived here? Was it the Smith family? Oh, okay. Sorry, Anya. We'll see you soon. The boy shrugged again. I don't know. I seen a family around here at Christmas, but I don't know their names. A young woman, her parents. No, wait, it was 2 young women. The man perked up. Was one of the young women wearing leg braces? The boy's eyes widened and he stopped kicking the ball. Braces? No. He shook his head. The man sighed, rereading the address that he'd written down on the slip of paper in his pocket. It said this was the Smith residence, he mumbled. The boy cocked his head. You can come back to the hospital with me and ask my dad if you like. Then he frowned. He stooped to the pavement to pick up the ball. Bloody hell, it's only been a week, he complained, running his fingers over a nick in the leather. He shook his head. So, how does that sound, sir? Sir? But when he looked up, the man was gone. There's not even much left, and we're getting a part 3? I need some water. Oh, I'm glad it's a good distraction. All right, so apparently we've got part 3. There's not even that much left. Part 3. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, where all spirits are melted into the air, into thin air. Prospero, The Tempest. Man, I love Shakespeare. Maybe we'll read Shakespeare one of these days. Oh, should we read The Twelfth Night? This book is a roller coaster. Part 3, not chapter 3, part 3. Chapter 38. Hold on. The last chapter was April 1944. This is February 1952. February 1952. That's 8 years later. That's a huge jump. Lena will be a full adult. Whoa. I just got chills. February 1952. London, England. Horus took a measured sip of his pint, enjoying the way the amber liquid streamed down his throat. And the war's over. The war's over. Because my mom was born in 1947 and the war was over. Before my mom was born. I think the war was over before her sister was born in 45. Right? When did the war end? Did the war end in 44 or 45? The war is over by this point for sure. I mean, like, officially. He set the mug down and tugged at a stray blue I think 45. Yeah, I think so. Tugged at a stray blue thread that dangled from the cuff of his jacket. Gone were the bespoke suits made by expensive tailors and the custom-made shoes. Following a less than stellar run in Asia, Horus was now back in London with the only thing he owned, his home. The circus was no more. He had no wife, no children, and no friends to share his life with. Even Chadwick had up and left him. He toyed with the idea of starting over in America, but at nearly 50 years of age, he was too exhausted from years of butting heads with creatives, producers, and investors to do it anymore. The world of wonders was now a thing of the past, a piece of folklore. From time to time, he overheard adults excitedly telling their children about the show as they stood in line at Piccadilly or Alhambra, but he never revealed himself, and no one ever asked who he was, his creative genius hidden in the body of an anonymous man, unremarkable without his colorful attire. In the years since the circus unraveled, Horus had tried to pinpoint the start of its demise, when the sparkle began to fade, when the glitter turned to dust. Still, he kept up the illusion as long as he could. No one could deny that he had had a good run. Chugging back the last of his pint, the thin layer of white foam settled on his mustache, and he wiped it with the back of his hand. At times like this, he remembered the girl and her odd hobbies. He remembered her desire to become something, not to simply accept her condition, but to push past it. And he remembered the day the light went out in her eyes, when her father and that boy were taken. He reached into his pocket, carefully counting out a few silver coins before ordering another drink. He sipped at his ale. Horus's mind wandered back to a similar night 8 years ago when he'd been back in London for a month that spring. He'd been minding his own business, seated at the bar, when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He remembered the horror he'd felt, what it was like seeing him reappear like a ghost. He'd taken a seat next to him without asking and ordered a large pint. Horus had glanced around quickly, hopefully. "Don't bother. He's not here," the man said gruffly. There was no time for niceties. He'd grabbed Horus by his collar and insisted he hear what he had to say, and so Horus sat listening to the tales of horrors he'd witnessed, the pain he'd endure, and asking after Lena. Always asking after Lena. Where is she? Didn't she tell anyone where she was going? Finally, he'd left an address. If you hear anything, now, tomorrow, or in 10 years, you must tell me. And then he was gone. And now here Horus was, with all the power to change things. He removed a folded-up slip of newspaper he'd torn out of the Daily Express earlier in the day, smoothing it out on the counter, a drop of ale turning one of its edges damp. He'd been happy to read it, glad that the girl was safe. He lamented the blame that everyone had placed on him in the first place and thought briefly about doing nothing. What did he owe anyone? Besides, judging from the information in the newspaper, it seems like the girl's life had turned out fine. Far better than most cripples. Oh, I hate that word. As he stumbled out of the flask, taking a roundabout road to his home on Fitzroy Park, he remembered how the only person who'd been at the port to see him off was his grandmother, and how he'd cried, ashamed, years later when she died and he wasn't able to get back for the funeral. To lose a loved one was a terrible thing, he told himself, fumbling with the lock on his front door before careening through, nearly knocking over his coat rack in the process. In the safety of his study, Horus took out a sheet of notepaper and a pen, and in block capitals he wrote just one line. I found what you've been searching for. He paused before taking out an envelope from his desk drawer. He folded the letter in two and put it in along with the newspaper clipping. Then he sealed it and took out a worn piece of paper with an address scrawled on it that he'd carried in his breast pocket for the past 8 years. He'd been copying the address onto the envelope and told himself he'd take it to the post office first thing in the morning. Once it reached its destination, the recipient would be able to do the rest. I feel like I can't stop. Like, I know what time it is, but like, we have to keep going, right? Like, we can't stop now. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I got chills. I'm stressed. Chapter 39, March 1952, London, England. So it's another month. After the lecture on molecular biology, they had one special epigenetics that wasn't even in the program. I simply had to stay, Lena said, trying to catch Olivia's eye as her friend roamed around. They were on the second floor of Selfridge for what Lena had hoped would be her final wedding dress fitting. Really sorry I was late, she said, looking forlornly at Marjorie, the senior seamstress. Marjorie raised an eyebrow and pulled 2 pins out from between her teeth. This book has been full on heartache and frustration. On another note, I do appreciate, we read a book about Lena who survived. Yeah. Sticking them into her pincushion. Can't even be cross. I've no idea what you're talking about. Olivia laughed from across the bridal boutique in the flagship department store, fingering a pair of white pumps. You think you're having a hard time? Imagine growing up with her. Lena grinned. She was glad to have Olivia here, grateful that she was still in her life. After the risk of an air raid forced Briarwood to close up, they'd completed their A-levels at school in Brighton, where Clara had accepted another role. After school, Olivia had done a shorthand course and gone straight to work at a typing pool in a publishing company in Soho, where she'd wowed the men and women alike with her handmade clothes and razor-sharp wit. Lena had tried to convince her to attend University College London, but Olivia was having none of it. The promise of a steady income and life away from her mother, the buzz of being young in post-war London, was just too enticing. Despite their divergent career paths, 2 girls remained close. They tried to meet up every week, Lena trekking down to Dean Street after classes on Mondays, and Olivia coming up to Gower to sip on martinis and ogle the men at university on Fridays. Olivia had gotten married just 5 months earlier to David, a man she'd met at work, and she, alongside Clara, had been instrumental in helping Lena prepare for her own upcoming nuptials. If you insist on twisting and turning like this, you'll have a dress that's half backwards, Marjorie said as Lena squirmed. Sorry, Lena said. Liv, you won't believe what else, she continued. I heard 2 students discussing Rosalind Franklin. She's a chemist at King's doing amazing work on X-ray diffraction of images and DNA. Forgetting her promise, Lena twisted her head around and knocked over the pincushion Marjorie had placed on a footstool. Oh, goodness, let me help you, she said, bending down. You will do no such thing. Marjorie pretended to be upset, but the elderly seamstress loved Lena's spark. Now keep still. Lena grinned sheepishly as Olivia came into view and perched herself on an armchair across from her. She winked at Lena's reflection in the mirror and removed a slim gold compact from her purse and began powdering her nose. So, Lena continued, Rosalind does all this research and gets no credit for it, but the men do, and it's just because they're men. Someone said she might leave King's. That's how bad it is. Well, that's good. More room for you. Lena shook her head modestly. She has a PhD. I don't even have a medical degree. But you will, Olivia said sanguinely, plopping her compact back into her purse. Lena smiled, grateful for the faith that her friend had in her and her abilities. But stories like Rosalind made her doubt her choice and career path. A biology degree and work experience as a science teacher at the school Clara owned in Islington hadn't been enough for her to gain acceptance to any of the medical schools she'd applied to last year. If a woman like her can't catch a break, what hope do I have? Olivia had migrated towards her accessories section and was eyeing a rack of bow ties. You're different, she insisted. Remind me again, what color is Harry's shirt? The groom's clothing choices shall be dictated by the bride's attire and not the other way around. Marjorie clucked her tongue. There, Olivia said. Oh, this would be perfect for India, she exclaimed, removing a colorful silk scarf from one of the racks. She draped it across her shoulders. Are you off to the subcontinent? Marjorie asked. Lena felt her cheeks redden. Harry, her fiancé, had accepted a work assignment that would take him to why can't I pronounce this? Delhi for a few months starting in August. He was a photojournalist with the Daily Express assigned to the Asia beat. Because Lena wouldn't be teaching over the summer, she decided to go with him. It had worked out perfectly. They were to leave a week after their wedding and spend 3.5 weeks together, and then if everything went her way, she'd be able to start medical school in September. We are, she smiled, thinking about how excited Harry had been when she'd agreed to go. Mind your stomachs, both of you. Right, Marjorie said, taking a step back. Let's take a look. Lena turned around to glance in the mirror. She'd never been the type of girl to imagine what the perfect wedding dress would look like, but if such things existed, this had to be pretty close. The batoo neckline accented her shoulders perfectly, and below it sat hand-stitched lace bodice and a full skirt that stopped just short of her ankles, giving the dress a modern spin on the traditional tea-length gowns she'd seen splashed on the covers of the fashion magazines Olivia and Clara had helped her look through. You look like a real princess, Olivia said admiringly. Doesn't she? Marjorie nodded her approval, and held out a matched-fitting bolero jacket. You're both too kind, Lena said. And you're too modest, Olivia said, grabbing hold of her friend's shoulders. And you're too obnoxious, Sasha said to the truck. Olivia grabbed hold of her friend's shoulders, forcing her to look in the mirror again. Look at you. I hope Harry realizes how lucky he is. Lena blushed. She'd always prided herself on being rational, but she thought there had to be some sort of magic in the air the night she met Harry. It had happened at the Islington Assembly Hall. She and Olivia had gotten dressed up as they always did on Saturday evenings, heading for her favorite place on Upper Street. Though Lena could now walk with no aids of any kind, activities like running and dancing were still very difficult for her, but she enjoyed the music they played at this particular hall and relished the chance to be in the company of people her age. She usually sat by herself, content with her role as an observer. On the night she met Harry, she'd been feeling an unusual pang of loneliness while watching Olivia glide across the floor with David. So she'd taken her cup of orange squash and wandered outside, thinking the fresh air would make her feel better. Got 2 left feet like I do? Lena had spilled a bit of her drink, startled to see a young man seated on the wall that ran across the perimeter of the entrance. He was hitting his legs against the brickwork. Come on, you're ruining the moment. You really are. A lit cigarette dangling from his fingers. She noticed he was clutching a camera in one hand, a thick strap around his neck. I just want to read my book, y'all. I just want to read my book. I know, I really want to be happy for her too, but I'm afraid this truck thinks it's the main character. I know. Time to go. It's at my neighbor's house right now. Chugga. If Zoe were here now, she'd go, wow, big truck. Blue truck. And I would say, yes, baby, it's a big truck. Blue truck. Every time she sees a truck, she says, wow, big truck. She's an ego boost, I tell you what. I didn't think anyone was here. The man jumped down and stubbed out his cigarette and extended his hand. Didn't mean to frighten you. Harry Evans, pleased to meet you. Lena Thompson, she replied, taking his hand. Got a Mediterranean glow to you, Mrs. Thompson. Lena felt her face turn pink as she corrected him. It's Miss. Harry paused, shifting his camera from one hand to the other. My apologies. Miss Thompson, are you not from here? Well, Lena started wondering how to explain her childhood. I was born in Greece, but I suppose I'm from all over. Harry grinned. Well, hello, Lena from all over. How did you manage that? My father was part of a traveling circus. I know, she definitely has me hostage. Miles too. Wow, good job, Mommy. Yeah, when we go to the park, if Zoe sees other kids do anything she likes, she goes, wow, good job, you did it. I'm like, you're great, good little cheerleader. My father was part of a traveling circus. This evening just got a lot more interesting, he said, inching closer to her. Lena felt her skin turn from pink to scarlet and wished Olivia would come outside. It wasn't as though she didn't like men. It was more like she wasn't accustomed to them noticing her. Before she could say anything else, she pointed to his camera. That's a heavy thing to be lugging around on a night out. Harry patted the camera with one hand. She's the only girl who'll go out with me, he said, and Lena giggled. She liked this man. She liked how she immediately felt at ease in his company. I'm a photojournalist with the Daily Express. You ever read it? No, Lena said carefully, but I'll pick it up. Harry rolled his eyes. Save your money. I'm kidding. I'm kidding, he clarified, watching Lena's facial expression go from curious to alarm. It's a good gig. I've been at it for like 6 years now, mostly in India, covering the move to independence. Wow, Lena breathed, feeling the feeling of wanderlust washing over her. It had been ages since she'd traveled outside the city. Harry nodded. It's pretty amazing, but I was getting tired of living outside of a suitcase, so I asked to come home for a bit and pick up some local work. He held the camera up to his eye before Lena could stop him and snapped a few photos of her. Gotta get to the infusion of my meds. Oh, yeah, definitely need to do that. Harry let the camera hang around his neck as he grinned. They told me to take pictures of every pretty girl I saw. So, he continued, not missing a beat, you feel like going back in there? Lena bit her lower lip and frowned. I'm afraid I'm not much of a dancer. Harry removed his Tribbley hat and held out his hand. Me either. How about we go make fools of ourselves? They danced until Lena's feet ached. Much to Olivia's delight, Harry had insisted on escorting Lena home, but not before stopping for food at one of the Turkish restaurants nearby. They'd sat next to each other, Lena recounting tales of Hungary, Estonia, and France as she nibbled on the olives and creamy hummus. Harry explained that the Daily Express was one of the largest broadsheets on Flat Street. I swear to everything. As its main photojournalist in the Asian Bureau, he'd spent the last 5 years snapping roll after roll, documenting the conflict in West Bengal with the war in Kashmir and the assassination of Gandhi. Lena thought his life sounded both dangerous and thrilling, and she sat spellbound by his stories, hanging on his every word. He explained that he liked photography because to him it was one of the only universal languages. Yeah, that's what it sounds like, Shira. That's what it sounds like. A journalist can only write in so many languages, but a photo, well, you don't need to be able to speak a certain language to understand a photo. Almost overnight, their chance meeting blossomed into a fully fledged relationship. Lena no longer felt like someone just tagging along with Olivia's plans, cringing when she went to dinner parties alone, feeling like the pity invite. Harry courted her like no man ever had. They'd spent nights at a cozy gin bar in Stoke Newington, watched films at the Roxy. When the weather was fine, they drove out to Brighton in Harry's old car, the hot stones of the beach warming the soles of Lena's feet as Harry splashed her with the cold seawater. Lena loved that he was well-traveled, a rarity amongst people that she met. She loved that he knew some of the places that she'd been and that he spoke 2 languages. But what she loved most about him was that he asked her what she thought of things. Often, he developed a series of photos for a work assignment, and then he'd ask her opinion on it. While she'd never placed a premium on dating, most of the men Lena had met were far more interested in her looks than her thoughts. So, when Harry had proposed to her with his grandmother's ring outside the hall they'd met at just 7 months earlier, Lena didn't hesitate to say yes. Is this jacket comfortable? Lena blinked twice, realizing that Marjorie and Olivia were waiting for her response. Yes, she said, looking at herself in the mirror. Everything's perfect. I'm kind of brokenhearted. Do we keep going? I feel like we have to keep going, right? Or like, do we just finish it tomorrow? How many pages do we have left? Do we keep going? Chapter 40? Chapter 40? I'm home, Lena announced, entering the house that she shared with Clara and Fitz and their 2 children in North London. Auntie Lena! Harriet, Clara and Fitz's 5-year-old daughter, came zooming into view and wrapped her arms around Lena's legs. Lena laughed and stroked Harriet's reddish-brown hair. Someone's happy to see me. Have you got my dress? Harriet was going to be flower girl at the wedding, and when Lena told her the news, she'd been asking every day if her dress was ready. Not yet, but soon. Lena removed Harriet's hands from her legs and led her into the parlor. You're just in time! Clara appeared carrying a tray of tea and biscuits, which she set down on the coffee table. How does it look? It's beautiful. Marjorie's done a fine job, Lena replied. Is there enough for me? Help yourself, Clara said. She watched as Lena removed her coat and poured herself a steaming cup of tea. How were lectures? Really interesting, which is bad news. I've yet another specialty to consider, Lena explained. Speaking of which, has the post come? Clara's smile faltered. It has, she said, trying to keep her voice even. She picked up the pile of mail and handed it to Lena. Thanks. Clara waited, her heart sinking as she watched Lena thumb through the letters. She'd known when Lena found the one she was looking for. And sure enough, Lena's reaction was obvious before she even opened it. It was the thin envelope, stamped with the return address of one of the universities that she'd applied to. Lena thought back to the other letters she'd received, all typed in the same font and delivered in the same size of envelope, and she felt the familiar feeling of her dreams slipping away from her. Bracing herself, she slid it open and saw the all too familiar words, the ones that she'd been reading for the last 2 years. We regret to inform you. I'm so sorry, Clara said. She'd known Lena long enough to understand that she'd need time to process the information, but she also knew that Lena was far more resilient than people gave her credit for. It's all right, Lena said quietly, her stomach feeling sink. She knew how lucky she was to have all that she did, Harry, a teaching job, an upcoming wedding, but what she really wanted, what she'd always wanted, was to be a physician. Acceptance to medical school was meant to be the icing on the cake, a reward for all her hard work. Still, it didn't seem right to complain, not after everything she and Clara and everyone else she'd loved growing up had endured. She pocketed the letter and stood up, plastering a smile on her face. Shall I book a table for Joe's? It might make you feel better, Clara asked. We're going to the Gargoyle Club with Olivia and David, but thanks, Lena said as she retreated to her room to get ready. She paused and turned the doorknob. There was one option she hadn't mentioned to anyone. Perhaps it wouldn't be so bad to share it with Clara now, but then Lena thought about how hard it had been to tell people she'd been rejected from all these other schools. She remembered the pitying looks on people's faces mixed with the smug glances they couldn't help but cast her way. No, she thought as she pushed her door open. It was best to keep quiet. The doorbell rang just as Lena was lining her lips up with a deep burgundy lipstick. I'll get it, Lena heard Harriet's high-pitched voice, followed by the sound of her little feet scurrying down the hall. She grabbed her purse and stepped into the hallway just in time to see Harriet tug open the front door and fall silent as Harry walked in. Good evening, Miss Harriet, he greeted her, removing his hat and smiling down at her. With his charming personality, easygoing presence, and a sharp sense of style, Harry was immediately liked by everyone he met. Say hello to Uncle Harry. Lena leaned over Harriet to hug her fiancé. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, a gray wool coat, and signature wingtip shoes. He had his hair slicked back. Hello, Uncle Harry, Harriet whispered as Clara came out from the living room. Harry, lovely to see you. And you, Mrs. Thompson. Are things well with the school? How's Mr. Thompson? He's fine, thank you. And as for the school, well, it's never dull. Lena tells me you're off to the Gargoyle. Harry grinned. My publisher got us in. What I would give to be young again, Clara said, smiling. Can I get you a glass of scotch? Harry checked his watch. I think we just better head out. Bye, you. Lena pecked Harriet on her cheek. Don't wait up, she said to Clara. Clara moved closer to the door as the couple stepped outside. Do have a good time, she said to Lena. Everything will be all right. What was that about? Harry asked as they walked to the taxi idling on the street. He opened the door for Lena and slid in, the cold leather of the seat making her jump. The evening air carried with a wisp of leftover winter chill that had snuck its way into the back seat. Lena hesitated as the driver pulled away from the house. She didn't want to get into a discussion about it, not right as they were going to go out, but this was Harry. She was supposed to tell him everything. That's what couples did. A letter came from guys. I wasn't accepted. Harry's face fell. Lena, I'm so sorry. He put his arm around her and Lena leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. Did they give a reason? They never do. Was that the last one? Lena hesitated before nodding. She buried her face in the soft wool lapel of his coat and inhaled his scent. Well, it's entirely their loss, Harry said, stroking her hair. As the car sped towards Soho, they sat in silence, Lena feeling grateful that they were comfortable enough to not have to fill every minute they spent together with words. As they turned off Theobald's Road, they flew down the A40, and Harry cleared his throat. Lena, don't take this the wrong way, but if you don't want to go anymore, it's all right. Lena sat up. Of course I want to go. Besides, they've left Kensington already, and we can't very well have them standing there. I meant school, he said, concerning look in his eyes. No one would fault you if you didn't want to try again, least of all me. But I've been thinking, maybe you could just stay in India with me. They're always looking for good English teachers at the missionary. Lena bristled. I am not an English teacher. Why would you say that? Harry held his hands up. I didn't mean anything bad by it. It's just hard to see you get down about all these letters, that's all. You're not the one who has to deal with all the rejections, Lena retorted. She crossed her arms, peering out the window. They were close to their destination, but Soho was busy at night, throngs of young partygoers crowding the streets that were crawling all along at a snail's pace. Harry took a deep breath. You know I'll support whatever you do, but you don't have to prove anything to anyone. That's not what this is about, she snapped. Harry didn't say anything, and Lena glanced in the rearview mirror. She caught the driver's eye and wondered how many arguments he'd been privy to in his line of work. Sighing, she dropped her head in her hands as they rolled on to Dean Street. Look, why don't you just go and have a drink with them and I'll head home? Lena, Harry said, taking her hand in his, all I'm saying is that maybe there's an easier alternative. I don't want it to be easy, she said stonily. I want to be a physician. Harry smiled his warm smile, the one that never failed to put her at ease. I know, and you'll get there. He tossed his head towards the entrance to the club where there was a long line of people that had formed. Forget I suggested anything. Let's just have fun. Yeah, it does. 3 hours later, a beleaguered Lena kicked off her shoes at home, watching them fall with a thud to the floor. She knew she should try to be quieter since the children were sleeping, but she was too tired to care. Despite her best efforts to stay positive, Harry's words had grated on her all night, and drinks in the company of good friends had just worn her out as she pretended to be fine. As she stumbled into the foyer, she couldn't help but feeling sorry for herself. True, she had one last option, but given her track record, it was a long shot at best. She'd likely find herself in the same position she'd been in last September, writing essays, asking for references, and licking stamps as she crossed her fingers, hoping one of the applications would yield the result she desired. She didn't want to stop trying, but as time marched on, her resolve weakened, the rejection being looked at awkwardly at dinner parties when people asked about her life, having to work 3 times as hard as every man. It was all beginning to weigh on her. She'd known it wouldn't be easy, but she'd also believed that hard work would triumph in the end. And she thought she put on a brave face, and though she put on a brave face, inside she was struggling. Every single rebuff was like a tiny paper cut, wedging itself deeply within her skin. Lena, Claire called out from the top of the staircase. Sorry, Lena whispered loudly. I didn't mean to wake you. You're home early. I got a bit cross with Harry. She rubbed at the mascara on her eyes. Sounds like you could use some tea, Clara said as she wrapped her dressing gown around herself and walked down the stairs. Go on, get into your nightgown. I'll put on the kettle. 10 minutes later, wrapped in a cozy blanket, a mug of chamomile tea in hand, Lena explained what had happened. Then he said instead of medical school, why not stay in India with him and teach? He made it out like it was so easy for me to just give up on my life. Lena's voice wobbled as the last word slipped out. Do you know what the worst part is? He's right. Come now. There's no right or wrong in this case. No, he's right. It's not as though I have a place at university. Would it be so bad to have a change of scene and spend some time with my new husband? Lena looked down into her mug. I told myself I'd try for 2 years, and now it's been 2 years, but I've not gotten in. Any sane person would stop, but I can't. There's something there, she said, her voice wavering. I must be crazy to love something this much, something that is even real. It's not a person or anything worthwhile. The pursuit of academic excellence is entirely worthwhile, Clara said. Besides, being a physician is a noble profession. Lena sniffed. I can't believe he suggested I stop. Clara raised her eyebrows. In his defense, he never told you to stop. He merely suggested an alternative for the time being, but the decision is yours. Do you want to keep trying? She watched Lena nod. Then forget everyone else. They'll comment no matter what you do, so you might as well take the choice you want. How did you keep going? Lena asked. How did you not let it undo you? Well, becoming a teacher is a bit more acceptable for women than completing medical school, Clara pointed out. But it's the same with anything. If you have a setback, you rest, and then one day, probably sooner than you think, you'll wake up, ready to try again. She reached out and rubbed Lena's legs. Get some rest. There are few things that can't be fixed by a good night's sleep. We love Clara. Clara's the win, you know what I mean? We're on page 300, and it goes to like 375. We obviously can't get through 75 pages today. What's today? Today's Tuesday. We'll be able to get through 75 pages tomorrow. Hold on. This is going to pause for a second. I just want to check and see if Catherine has texted me, and maybe I'll read one more. Okay, sorry. I'm back. Catherine is going to hide because the rain is, they're not coming over just yet because the rain is so intense, so I have time to read another chapter if everybody wants to, if you can still hear me. Clara is great. She is definitely a good friend. Okay, I didn't know if it was back. Okay, it's back. Chapter 41. The next morning, Lena was up early. She'd slept soundly, and as Clara had predicted, she was already feeling better. By 9 o'clock, she'd made breakfast for everyone, washed the dishes, and was getting ready to head to the Italian market in Clerkenwell with Olivia when the doorbell rang. I've got it, she called, opening the door where a postman stood holding a box. A package for Mr. Fitz Thompson? Yes, that's us. I'll sign, Lena said, taking the pen and scribbling her name on the form. Your post and the newspaper are underneath. Thanks, Lena said, letting him put everything in her outstretched arms. She edged back into the house, kicking the door shut with the back of her foot, and walked into the parlor. Oof, she muttered, settling the package down on the table. She checked the return address, wondering what it could be. For you? Clara asked. She entered the parlor from the kitchen and was drying her hands on a tea towel. Fitz, Lena said. Do you know of a company in Worcester? Worcester? I've no idea what he's gone and ordered this time. Hold on, I'll get a knife. Lena was so busy wondering what might be inside that she nearly forgot about the post and paper. She slid both out from under the box, placing the newspaper on the sofa before rifling through the mail. 2 mail order catalogs, an ad for a new vacuum cleaner, a letter for Clara, and 1 big envelope for her. Immediately, Lena felt a flutter in her stomach. She glanced at the return address, not daring to get her hopes up. Universidad de Paris, it read. Here, Clara said, walking back into the room, extending a knife to Lena. Lena took it from Clara and slowly slid open the envelope, removing the contents with trembling hands. Dear Miss Thompson, we are delighted to inform you that you have been accepted into the Université de Paris School of Medicine. Your acceptance is for the autumn term beginning September 1952. Below you will find the detail of our policies and payment information. We invite you to join us for a meeting in the coming weeks. All students, ... I wonder if I can, I can see if I click on this. Normally I have to take James' appointment, but it's 8:30 today, it's at 11. Oh, perfect. Yeah, because the rain is delaying a lot of the things that Catherine and I have to do, I figured I might as well just keep reading since it's recording anyway. It's just gonna go straight onto the thing. Now I can see your comments. Oh no, now they just disappeared again. Okay, I'm gonna get used to how this works eventually. Maybe I won't need to. Stunned, Lena reread the letter. She closed her eyes and opened them again, not believing what she'd just seen. Clara had seen the big envelope, her insides starting to swirl with anticipation. I thought you received all of your responses. Don't be angry, Lena said, gesturing for her to sit. As Clara perched on the sofa, Lena launched into an explanation. After I didn't get into any schools in England last year, I thought I should have contingency plan, she said. Except, well, I didn't tell anyone. It's been so hard admitting defeat, telling people that despite my best efforts, I still haven't been accepted. You know, sometimes it feels like people take perverse pleasure in me not succeeding. Yes, Clara said. I believe the Germans refer to that as Schadenfreude. Right. So I applied to a school in Paris, and, well, it looks like the French love me, she said, unable to hold back her news any longer. Clara blinked, trying to register Lena's words. Is that... She pointed to the envelope. Did you... Lena nodded, handing the letter over to Clara. I did it. I got in. And then Clara threw herself around Lena with such vigor that she almost knocked her over. They were crying and laughing all at once, letting out shrieks that echoed up to the top floor, not caring if Fitz Jr. woke up. They caused such a commotion that Harriet came running into the parlor, demanding to be included in what was happening. Yeah, someone's like, nope, and we keep going anyway. When they finally calmed down to catch their breath, Lena couldn't stop beaming. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. Forget being sorry. This is thrilling, just thrilling. Just then the doorbell rang again. Lena looked at Clara. Olivia, she said, racing to tug the door open. Before Olivia could speak, Lena waved the letter in her face. I did it, she said, unable to restrain herself. I got into medical school. You're joking, Olivia yelled, her jaw dropping. I knew you'd do it, kid. I knew it. She leaned down and squeezed her friend as tightly as she could. We have to celebrate. You, me, David, Harry. Lena's face fell. Harry, he's away on assignment till Friday. Belated celebration Saturday? Lena frowned. Oh, I hope he won't be cross with having to wait to hear this. Have you seen the way that man looks at you? Olivia said. He'll be overjoyed. Lena grinned and reread the letter again. I'm to travel to Paris to meet with them. We'll get you in on the night ferry from Victoria Station as soon as we can, Clara said. Fitz will make the arrangements. She clasped Lena's hand and smiled at her. I can't tell you how happy I am, and you know your father and Alexander would have been so proud. Thanks, Lena said, feeling her throat tighten. And as if on cue, Olivia swooped in. Right, she said, taking her friend by the elbow. If we can't have a full-on celebration until Harry's back, then I'm taking you out right now. Cream tea on me. Olivia's a good friend, too. The next week went by in a whirlwind. Lena suddenly on an upswing, having to think about settling into a whole new life. She moved through her days in an excellent haze, and in the evenings she sat with Clara, discussing where she and Harry might live, what courses would be best when it came time to specialize, and more. At night she struggled to sleep, but it was finally for a good reason. No longer riddled with anxiety about what she'd be doing next year, she instead stayed up dreaming about doing rounds at a hospital. By the time Saturday rolled around, Lena was bursting to tell Harry the news. She decided she couldn't do it over the phone. She wanted to see his face and to witness his reaction. Olivia had booked them a table at Scott's in Mayfair, and Lena asked Harry to meet her a little earlier so that she could share the news. When she saw him standing by the entrance, she rushed into his arms. Well, hello, he said, laughing as he leaned down to kiss her. You're excited. She paused. She wanted to be seated with champagne at the ready. I'm just so happy you're back. I should go away more often, then, he said, winking at her as he took her hand and led her inside. As they waited for their coats to be taken, Lena took in the lush surroundings. Heavy black draperies lined the walls. Rows of expensive spirit bottles were stacked neatly at the bar, and the waiters in crisp black uniforms smoothly traversed between the kitchen and the tables. Large chandelier hung from the center of the room. All around them, moneyed people of Mayfair and Kensington sat smoking and laughing, not a care in the world. As the waiter led them to their table, Lena's mind flitted back to the circus. Horus would have loved this place, she thought somewhat wistfully. Although she had no desire to ever see him again, Lena had learned that the passage of time did something strange to memories. Ever so slowly it chipped away at the most painful parts, smudging the hurt and softening the aches, to point that she could now reminisce about her childhood in a fond manner, not always stuck on the parts that hurt. It's very true. Lena, Olivia exclaimed. She had a martini glass in one hand and was dressed in a silver silk sheath that hugged her slim frame. You're early, Lena said, trying to mask her disappointment. As she hugged her friend, her stomach was in knots. She wanted to tell Harry by herself. It would just have to wait, she thought, taking a seat. Olivia nodded and sipped her martini. David couldn't wait to come. He's been desperate to get to eat here for ages. Can you blame the man? David asked. It's one of the only places in the city with butter. The two couples ordered drinks and the food and settled into a discussion. So, Harry, David said after they started on their main courses, Liv tells me you're off to the subcontinent. Harry plucked an olive out of his drink. We are continuing the reporting on the ramifications of partition. Though I thought I'd drag this one along with me, he said, rubbing Lena's leg affectionately. We'll have to be in Delhi most of the time, but I took a few weeks out for us to travel. We'll visit Agra and Jaipur, and then down to Kerala and Goa. They have amazing beaches there. David laughed. Sounds idyllic. Excuse me, waiter. He flagged down one of the waiters. A bottle of Bollinger, please. He looked back at Harry, beaming. Let me be the first to say we're so happy for you both. Harry frowned slightly. That's very kind of you, but there's really no need for champagne. News like this should be celebrated. Though I must admit, Lena, I was in the camp of the ones who thought it was impossible. Thought what was impossible? Harry turned to Lena. Lena felt the color drain from her face. Terrified, she glanced at Olivia, who seemed to be realizing the same thing simultaneously. Darling, Olivia said, turning to David, I told you not to embarrass them. Why don't you tell Harry about your latest investment deal? Nonsense! It deserves a toast! David drawled, picking up the flute of champagne, the yellow gold liquid sloshing around precariously. To Paris! Paris? Harry asked. As David drank, Lena tried desperately to think of a way to explain his comment. She looked hopelessly at Olivia, who was mouthing, I'm so sorry, at her. But Lena knew she had nothing to apologize for. She was the one who hadn't been completely honest. What's happening in Paris? Oh, you are good, Harry, David gawked, draining his flute and gesturing at the waiter to refill it. If you ever want to give up photography for acting, Liv, will you look at him? He's positively perplexed. Will someone please tell me what's going on? Harry asked, his frustration mounting. David, I need to go to the bar, Olivia shouted suddenly, standing up and dragging her husband out of his chair. Harry put down his glass and massaged his forehead. Is it just me or is he really drunk? Ferris, I mean. Lena bit her lip, wondering if she should let it slide and tell him the truth tomorrow. But she knew in her heart Harry would want to know. Bracing herself, she took a sip of champagne. Actually, he was talking about me. I got into medical school there in Paris. What? Lena smiled a small smile, but she noticed that Harry wasn't smiling back. She quickly adopted a more neutral expression. She took his hands in hers. I didn't tell anyone that I applied because I thought I wouldn't get in. It had been so hard with the other schools, and then having to tell everyone I failed again. Why not just try outside of London, I thought, and last week they accepted me. You got in? Lena nodded. And you weren't going to tell me about it? I didn't tell anyone, not even Clara. They knew, Harry said, pointing to Olivia and David at the bar. Only because Liv came around the morning that it happened. Harry, please don't be cross. I was going to tell you tonight. I wanted to do it in person to surprise you. Well, consider me surprised, he said quietly. After that, they sat at their table, not talking. Lena kept her gaze on the half-eaten slice of bread in front of her, wondering when it would be appropriate to speak again. Harry was alternating pushing around the cold bits of an oyster shell and poking at its lemon wedge. This wasn't how she wanted it to go, she thought, berating herself for having kept it all hidden. You could have told me you were applying, he whispered. I'm me. I'm your Harry. You can tell me anything. I know. Lena felt so guilty for not telling him. I just couldn't handle the disappointment again. Honestly, I'm as shocked as anyone. A sprig of parsley fell off the edge of Harry's plate and onto the glossy black table. Lena watched as he raked one hand absent-mindedly through his brown hair. When they first started dating, Lena would sometimes sneak into the local chemist and remove the cap from a BioCream bottle and deeply inhale before quickly putting it away. She liked the way it smelled, and it reminded her of him when she couldn't be around him. And what about India? We can still go, and I guess you can join me afterwards, she said, resting a hand on his arm. Harry, believe me, I wanted to tell you. I really did. He pulled away from her again. My God, Lena, you made a fool of me in front of our friends, and we're to be married. Married people tell each other things. Harry put his hand down on the table, trying to compose himself. Lena couldn't blame him. She watched a waiter carefully swerve away from their table, half wishing he would come over and ask them to leave. Harry rubbed his eyes, sighing, and then he took Lena's hands in his. I know getting all those rejections was hard, and this is, I just wish you'd involved me in it. If you can't tell me this, what else are you hiding? Nothing. You have to believe me when I say I didn't think I would get accepted. And the way you spoke to me about how I didn't have to prove anything to anyone, what makes you think I'm doing it for anyone? I'm doing it for myself. I never said you couldn't do it, he said firmly. I wouldn't put it past you to become the bloody prime minister if you wanted. But even the prime minister needs someone to walk beside them. He sighed again, shaking his head. I've lost my appetite, he continued, throwing his napkin and Pound's notes on the table. Do you mind if we go? Not at all, Lena said, standing up. A queasiness settled into her stomach as she gave Olivia a small wave and then followed Harry towards the exit. In all the conversations, he hadn't said anything about Paris or her getting in. It's good news about the school, isn't it? Harry dragged his hands across his face, forcing a smile. Yeah, it's great. Wow. Wow. Harsh, bro. Way to harsh someone's flow. I mean, like, way harsh, Ty. Way harsh. Way harsh, Ty. The next chapter... And it was just honest. She didn't have time yet. You got this, Lena. Yeah. Yeah. It's way harsh, though. What'd you send me, Becca? I can't see it. All right. I guess that's a good place to stop. And we can read more tomorrow. I think he is being a little too harsh, but I can understand why he's upset, but like you should have at least said like, "Oh, congratulations. I wish you told me." But anyway, I'm going to save this since it'll be directly on here, and I'll upload yesterday's after this. If it'll let me download that. Thanks for all hanging late. I know this was like a weird day, but Run Disney days are always weird days. My God, this rain needs to stop. I have things to do today. I can't. Anyway, I'll see you all later, and we'll have our live access back on TikTok tomorrow at like 7:18. So I won't be able to go live right at 7. It says I get it back at 7:18. So we'll be back on TikTok tomorrow right after 7. It was being a jerk.